Here are 3 traps in the King's Gambit. Let's go. The first one is e4, e5, and of course f4, the King's Gambit. And now the move d5, which is a legitimate and pretty common response by black. Here white can take the pawn on d5, and now e4, grabbing space, and also realizing that this pawn here, it's going to be very awkward to try to defend it, so often the queen will be able to win back that pawn at some point in the future. So now the move d3 comes challenging that center that black has on e4. And here, if the queen takes, you can play the move knight to d2, attacking the pawn on e4 and really asking, what are you going to do? And if black decides to take here, you can take with the bishop. Now, it might seem like this bishop lost its control on g2, and black can simply win the rook and a lot of material, but now they have fallen for the trap. Bishop to e4 traps the queen on g2, and it's basically game over. There is one thing to notice. This square is indeed defended enough times, so they can play, for example, queen to g4, which is what happened in the game. But now queen takes, bishop takes, and you have bishop takes b7. And the point is, your bishop here is not only a good defensive piece, but it's also a wonderful attacking piece on the other side of the board. You're going to win that rook. And if alternatively they try to do bishop to g4 and counterattack your queen, well, a similar outcome. You take the queen, they take your queen, and you can take the bishop here, and I'm pretty sure you're better, but even simpler, take the pawn here, and you're going to win the rook in your next move and be up a lot of material. Moving on to trap number 2, we have here another King's Gambit, of course, so e4, e5, and now f4. Now the move bishop c5, which again, if you play the King's Gambit, you're going to face this sometimes, and now knight f3, developing your knight simply. The move d6 is played here. Notice that even though you do have quite a lot of attackers on this pawn, you can't quite take yet because of the weakness you've created here on this diagonal, and that is the downside of pushing your f-pawn. Suddenly, queen to h4 is actually very powerful. If you move your king, that looks very dangerous. You're probably going to get checkmated, and if you play the move g3, then of course there's this common fork that happens between the king and the rook here. So you can't really take the free pawn. But instead what you can do is play the move c3 and go for the center instead with a possible d4 later on. So knight to f6 comes, and it might seem like, wait, the queen's connection to the square is gone, so can you not take here? Well, black's idea is that they're going to then recapture this pawn here, and they're not going to be down material, but they did miss something. Yes, this diagonal is weak for you, but this diagonal is also very exposed for their king. So queen to a4 picks up the knight, and this is the second trap. In the game, something a little different happened. In the game, instead of taking here, there was the move first bishop to d6, attacking the knight, instead of immediately recapturing the pawn here, but it doesn't really matter. After bishop d6, you simply move the knight back, and the same thing happens here. You pick off the knight, and you're in a wonderful position. Let's move on to the third and final trap. So the King's Gambit again with e4 and now f4, and the move d5, which is a very aggressive response. Here, white can take the pawn on d5, and now black pushes again to e4. We've already seen this actually in this, but this is a different trap. You play again d3, and after the move knight to f6, in the previous trap, we saw queen takes here, and then we saw this trap. That was the first trap we looked at. But this line is so popular, there are other traps that happen here. So if they decide to go ahead and develop their knight instead of taking the pawn, you still have some tricky possibilities here. So, for example, d takes on e4, now knight takes, and the move knight to f3, developing your knight, bishop to c5, and now you have the move queen to e2. You're pinning the knight, putting a lot of pressure on it, and notice you're not that scared of bishop to f2. It seems very dangerous, but all you do here is move your king, and yes, you've moved the king, but all of these pieces are kind of flimsy here. Black kind of has to do something like queen to e7 to defend the knight. Now maybe you can add more pressure with knight to d2, and after takes, notice that both of your kings have moved, and overall, you're not actually in a bad position here, so moving backwards, probably black won't go for this. So maybe queen takes on d5. That seems like a pretty good possibility. It seems like a free pawn. And now the move knight to d2 comes, and you kind of start to see the danger of having this knight here pinned with the king. And you have to defend it with f5. This is the best move. But even though this is the best move, you can continue with something like knight to c3 and attack the queen and attack the knight. And it's looking very, very bad here for black, and it's looking very hard to play. Also, with this move, this diagonal has been weakened, so castling seems a bit more dangerous. If you ever get a bishop onto this diagonal, it's also weak. So there are some clear downsides here for black, but in the game, we're looking at something else. We're looking at actually what happens if black castles. Now, black is trying to be sneaky here, because after takes, there's the move rook e8. But what black miscalculated here, and the beautiful trap, is knight to f6 check. It is a triple fork, but very importantly, you're also attacking the rook with the queen. So if they simply take the knight, you win the rook. And of course, they don't have the time now to take. Thank you all for watching this video. Subscribe for more videos like these, and I'll see you next time. Peace out.